Hello everyone, welcome to my Ghostwire Tokyo Tatari difficulty. No healing items, no skill upgrades walkthrough. This is Chapter 3, and a lot of Chapter 3 is going to be cleansing Torii gates, and there's also a protection mission where you have to protect Rinko, or fake Rinko. I think it's fake Rinko. Like, I'm still a little confused as to the whole event where Rinko is actually captured by Koamote, and then Koamote roleplays as Rinko. Like, was that Koamote who was disabling the conduit at the center building when you were protecting her, or was that someone else? Like, I'm not too sure when exactly Koamote had actually disguised herself as Rinko. But regardless, there is a protection section where you have to protect that version of Rinko. And then there is also a boss fight against Koamote, which will conclude Chapter 3. And it is a boss fight that is simple, but it's fun. And unfortunately, people, when they look at a simple fight, they immediately say, oh, it's a very shitty fight, that's so underwhelming, this and that, without fully embracing the other aspects of the fight, like the music, like the lore, the appearance of Koamote, and the fact that it embraces common sense. It's a stealth fight, obviously, because Akito is separated from KK. Oh, by the way, right here, this is a mandatory enemy encounter with this Shine Dancer. This enemy, you have got to exert caution when dealing with this enemy. This enemy is one of the most dangerous enemy types in the game, and it's also the creepiest enemy type in the game. If you have seen my blind playthrough, you will not believe the amount of times that Shine Dancer has creeped me out, flat out made me scared, and I literally screamed. Like, the way it moves around like it's a goddamn bee. It twitches around a lot, so it just catches you by surprise and it just generates a bit of shock when you just see it twitch to one direction or the other. It is very hard to actually sneak attack, and the only possible way you're going to be able to do a quick purge on that enemy is to stun it with a stun talisman. Don't deal with that enemy in the combat, just run away. You will never encounter that enemy in any kind of mandatory combat encounter. I mean, you might encounter it in some kind of Hyakiyako section. I mean, I've never really seen a moment that would really warrant a Shine Dancer to appear in a Hyakiyako section. It doesn't even appear during any of the Containment Cube sections. So I assume that enemy is only reserved for the open world, so that is great. But losing it can be tricky because of its ability to fly, and it has a gift for moving just as fast as you do, and it can literally breathe down your neck as you are trying to run away from it. So that is why you need to avoid that enemy. And also, its projectile attack, it fires multiple projectiles at you, and the lower its life, the more projectiles it'll fire at you, and the perfect block just isn't reliable against that kind of multi-hitting attack. So exert a lot of caution when fighting that enemy, only engage with it when you have to. The best way to deal with that enemy is to deal with it before it even has a chance to attack, and you'll see me demonstrate it when I get to another shrine that has the Shine Dancer. And I did die on this recording, but I trimmed it out. There is a moment where you have to destroy a bunch of barrier cores in order to disable a barrier. And after you do that, you then have to find a telephone card. And during the whole moment where you're supposed to find a telephone card, stay away from the rooftops, because there are Shine Dancers patrolling the rooftops. I dealt with at least 2 of them when I was trying to search the rooftops and just try to actually get to a spot where I could find this dog that would lead me to the telephone card, and the Shine Dancers killed me immediately, and losing them was so difficult. So, like I said, that enemy is one of the most dangerous enemy types in the game, and it's also the scariest enemy type in the game. Second to this would probably be the Lamentation, but the Lamentation is an enemy we'll be encountering later on in this video. But right now, the game wants you to head to the Sengoku Center building because Rinko told you to. Again, I don't know if that's Koamote or if that's the real Rinko. That's what's really puzzling. Like, KK said, I knew we were dealing with a fake, but at what point did he have these suspicions? At what point did Rinko say something very odd that would promote KK to say, I'm suspicious of her? It's rather confusing, but it doesn't really matter because it's not that significant of a story point to really think about. But we're now heading to the center building, and you have to interact with this marker over here before it lets you go inside the Sengoku Center building. I was so hoping this game would have pretty dynamic scripting, but that's the one part where you have to do what the game says before it allows you to go up. But there's not much to really say about the threats here. because a lot of Chapter 3 is just kind of open world activities reskinned to be a part of the main quest, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because you don't really notice it your first playthrough. But I do notice it a couple of times in repeat playthroughs. I mean, this is my second time playing the game, and it really felt like that. But again, you just gotta learn to go with the flow. At least it's not as stupid as Assassin's Creed Odyssey. It doesn't adhere to that kind of format to an absurd degree, like with Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Every single main quest, every single side quest is basically tasks that you are already doing in the open world. It basically uses a lot of the pre-existing assets of the open world to create a lot of the main missions and the narrative, and this game doesn't do that. I mean, it does it sometimes, but not to as severe a degree as Assassin's Creed Odyssey, so don't think anything of it. But you'll notice that we're already on Chapter 3, right? Well, this game has 6 chapters. That's right, 6 chapters. And chapters 5 and 6 represent the end game of the game, where the moment you start chapter 5, you are unable to go back into the open world. So chapters 5 and 6 represent the full finale. It might as well be one single chapter, so in essence, you have 5 chapters in the game. And chapter 4 is the longest chapter on the game. Chapter 3 is the second longest, but it still amazes me to this day that Tango Gameworks could make as short a main story as they did for an open world game. And it's so unlike an open world game to have this kind of format for its main story. It almost gives off the impression that Ghostwire Tokyo is not an open world game, but a wide linear experience. But even a wide linear experience like The Evil Within 2 had a larger main story compared to this game. It doesn't make any sense. I feel like there are certain points in Ghostwire Tokyo as you progress the game where it really feels like the developers had a limited time and budget, and the quality of these later parts of the game really show, and that's why there isn't a lot of substance to a lot of the later parts of the game. I mean, there is definitely substance there, but when the ending is just rushed like crazy, and the boss fight against Okina is shit, and then like the final boss in general is a pretty simple boss fight, you really have to wonder what exactly happened during the development of Ghostwire Tokyo to really create this lacking quality that you later see in Ghostwire Tokyo. I mean, in my blind playthrough, I wasn't noticing it as much, but I'm really noticing it right now when I'm actually going back through the game. But maybe that's only because I'm not in the right mindset, because of course, like, rewatching a previous video or just going through the game again is going to be a very different experience to the blind playthrough. And I'm pretty sure with open world games, or just with all games in general, the way critics actually judge the game is based on like your first experiences. And really with open world games, the only way you're going to be judging open world games properly is from a first playthrough. With repeat playthroughs, it's never going to be the same, and your score will definitely be lower, but I don't know if it's more suitable to judge the game based on the first playthrough or based on repeat playthroughs. Because obviously, like, speedrunners, for instance, will enjoy this game for its main story being very short. But of course, for people like me, I was kind of expecting a little bit more with the open world. I mean, the side missions were a lot of fun, but I don't know if I'll have the same emotional response when actually going through the side missions again. But that remains to be seen if I ever decide to go back to this game again, which I definitely will, because this game does have a bit of charm to it, and I do love the fact that this developer, a Japanese developer, is actually reveling in the fact that they're basing their game within Tokyo, and they're giving a lot of lore, they're giving a lot of insight into the mythology and the actual culture of Tokyo, and it's a lot of passion put in place with database entries, more so than what you really see with Assassin's Creed, and there's a lot of incentive to really indulge in it. Like, the story just seems to be the main driving point of this game, but sadly, the main story being short and then the lack of development with certain characters really brings the game down in that aspect. Ooh, this right here, this is a Rage Walker. You cannot escape combat with this enemy, you have to deal with it. This is a great example of how basic the combat can be at times, because the game doesn't really have a lot of creative mechanics, like a lot of hidden mechanics that really make it on par with that of The Evil Within. There's no sort of special animation that the enemies do that when you shoot them during that animation, you put them into a state where you can punish them with some kind of unique animation. Or also, when you perfectly block enemies, you can't put them in a state where you make them susceptible to a quick purge, even though the stun animation that they get put into should warrant that. And it leads to this whole mentality of just mindlessly shooting them, or at least it feels like it, but I don't think you notice it this much when you're actually doing the combat. but it can be a little bit of a tedious process, and this should be a game embracing all sorts of hidden mechanics, some sort of way to generate a shortcut to a really unique mechanic that should streamline the combat and not make it so reliant upon just shooting enemies like crazy. And it would reward investment in the game, because anyone heavily invested in the game and its combat mechanics will be the only people to discover these kind of hidden mechanics. I mean, that's what Evil Within and Evil Within 2 actually provided. Same with Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, and 7. And you've seen my footage of those games. You have seen a lot of the hidden mechanics put in place. You've seen a lot of the clever designs that the developers have put in place with their environmental designs, with their enemy designs, with the subtle mechanics. It shows effort. It shows that they actually put a lot of time and dedication to really making a combat system that, at a superficial glance, looks very simple, but when you look at it in depth, it has a lot of complexity to it. And sadly, I just don't really see that with Ghostwire Tokyo that much. But we're now protecting Rinko. I still don't know if this is the real Rinko or the fake Rinko, although it makes more sense for it to be the real Rinko, not the fake Rinko, who's actually disabling this conduit over here. And it's a really fun protection mission. It works as intended. When the enemies go to drain Rinko, just do the quick purge on them, and you will remove a lot of awkwardness, because imagine if you didn't have that mechanic. You would have to waste time getting so much ether from the crystallized ether, and during that time the enemies are just draining Rinko, and then they would just be scattering all over the place when you were knocking them away. And then you'd have to run the risk of geometry getting in the way when you're trying to keep your distance from the enemies. And then you'd have to worry about them teleporting. You'd have to worry about the perfect block moments, and the perfect block has no incentive for use in this game. And it'd just be a lot to track down, and it would pretty much lead to a lot of fatigue and just you feeling very tired with trying to deal with so many enemies with a limited combat system at the moment. But this is not that, and these developers were actually smart when designing these moments. I mean, the spirits are preoccupied, so I'm able to punish them. Common sense. Like, Tango Gameworks is the only game developer that will ever provide this kind of mechanic. I mean, they provided this kind of mechanic in the Evil Within 1 and the Evil Within 2, because there were certain animations that the Haunted and the Lost did where they would rise off the ground whenever you got near them. And during those animations, you could punish them with a stealth attack, and you would be able to kill them because they weren't aware of you. And it makes sense because they're heavily vulnerable when trying to rise up off the ground. And also, in one chapter in the Evil Within, in chapter 3, there was a moment where a Haunted would descend down the stairs to activate a trap, and during that animation, you could punish him with a sneak attack. It was beautiful. Like, there are so many moments in the Evil Within series that reward a keen observation and knowing how to punish accordingly. And that right there rewards player investment. And this is why I love Tango Gameworks, because they provide those kind of mechanics, and I didn't really notice it as much in Ghostwire Tokyo, but I'm not going to complain. But there is the Relentless Walker, so use a stun talisman. I'm not going to use a second stun talisman because I don't really have the money to afford more stun talismans, because stun talismans are like 4,000 mecha, and mecha is the currency of this game. You get mecha from yellow jars, and then you also get mecha from doing side missions, and you also get mecha from selling relics. I wasn't intending on doing the side missions in this walkthrough, as I explained previously in the first video, but I completely underestimated just how important the side missions are with giving you a lot of mecha. But you can get a lot of mecha anyway from just getting relics or by finding a lot of pots in the area. And these Relentless Walkers only drop mecha. I kind of wish they dropped ether. I'm not really a big fan of them dropping mecha because ether is your ammunition. And what if you didn't have ether, for instance? That'd be a big problem with that enemy. But I think it's a rare scenario that you'll never really encounter. And this concludes this protection section. So during this time, I'm just going to go on a bit of a tangent. I'm going to talk a bit more about the mechanics of this game. I don't think I mentioned it in the previous video, but I forgot to mention that with the wind power, there is some input drop errors, and there's also some input drop problems with Okina. I think I mentioned that part with Okina, but there are just times where you are firing the basic attack on the wind, and you just experience some delays in your input. Like, there are a lot of input drops with the wind. You don't notice it as much with the water or the fire, given the fact that they're not rapid-fire elementals. But wind, I really notice this a lot. And this is one of the main reasons why I didn't really want to do a no-damage walkthrough, because of this input drop error I was encountering with wind. And then with Okina, the amount of input drops I was getting with jumping, it was absurd that I didn't want to do no damage for Okina. Like, Okina is really the only boss in the game that I don't do no damage. Every other boss I try to do no damage, which I did, but Okina, no respect I'm giving to that boss. It is completely crap. Oh, and this right here, you have to disable these barrier cores before the barrier envelops the area, but This game does something really cool. In the options menu, you have the ability to disable time limits. So I think this is a time sequence, but if you have that option enabled in the options menu, you won't have to deal with the time limit. I think this is the only game where you have the ability to disable time limits that would normally be playing in these missions. And this is a standard that I think most games should do nowadays. If you want to have a hectic encounter and you want to experience the stress of a time limit, you can have that. But if you want to take this nice and slow, and you don't want to constantly restart the checkpoint each time you're trying to figure out this section, or just in general, you want to focus on the actual encounter itself and not deal with a stupid time limit, you can disable that, and it's really good design. It's an accessibility option done right in this game, and I don't think this game has many accessibility options based on what I actually saw in the options menu, but that ability to disable the time limit is one of the coolest design choices ever in a game. But I just remembered something important to mention, given that we were talking about inputs previously. Sprinting on this game. Do not mash the sprint button. Like, do not try to press the sprint button multiple times. You might do it accidentally if you feel like your character isn't sprinting, but he actually is sprinting. If you press the sprint button when you're sprinting, it will cancel out your sprint. It's one of the dumbest design choices in this game, because there were a couple of moments in my blind playthrough where it really felt like Akito wasn't sprinting, but it was just the way I was perceiving it at the time, and I pressed the sprint button while I was sprinting. It canceled my sprint out, and an enemy that I was trying to keep distance from managed to catch up to me and damage me. This happened during the first encounter with the Kuchisake in the blind playthrough, where I acknowledge this problem with the sprinting. I really don't like it when games have this kind of problem with sprinting, where you can disable it accidentally if you press the sprint button again, because a lot of the times with games, you know, there's going to be input drops, there's going to be problems with your inputs and the like. So the fact that the developers put in a system that someone will do accidentally because they're trying to hope that their character is adhering to the input that they actually registered, that can be very annoying in certain parts. But it's a minor issue, but just bear that in mind. And I'm guessing the reason why it happens is because the function for sprint in the options menu, you have the option to select either toggle or hold. So toggle being you can just tap the sprint button and you just go, or you hold the sprint button and that's how you actually sprint. And I'm guessing the toggle function also accounts for disabling the sprint because it's like on and off. It's probably like an on and off function for the toggle option. So that's probably why this issue happens, where you cancel your sprint out accidentally when you're trying to initiate your sprint if you feel that your character isn't sprinting. So that's probably why. But I've talked about that. Let me just talk a bit about the enemies on this game. So there are a lot of enemies on this game. I mean, a lot of them are kinda the same enemy, but they're just a different variation of it. Like, let's talk about the Rainwalker. So the standard Rainwalker is the one that is rather thin. It's in a black suit. There's also a white variant of it, but they function exactly the same. And that variant of the Rainwalker, at least the perfect block has some utility, because when you perfectly block the standard melee attack of the Rainwalker, and then you follow up with a basic attack from water, it always knocks the enemy over. And if you have the Quick Purge ability that allows you to finish off enemies on the ground, that can be a great way to get rid of the standard Rainwalker. It's just a shame that this doesn't apply to all variants of the Rainwalker. The Rain Slasher, which is the female Rainwalker that has the red umbrella and the blade, if you try to perfectly block her, she doesn't get stunned. And she only gets stunned and knocked into the ground if you use fire. Sometimes it doesn't work though with fire, but perfectly blocking her has no incentive, and her range attack is deadly, but you can redirect her projectile back at her, which is disappointing because it's an energy-based projectile, not a physical projectile. And then you have the Rugged Walker, which is the Fat Walker. It's basically a white walker that looks a lot like the white variant of the normal walker, but it's just fat. That one, the perfect block has no utility, and it just takes a beating, and it spends more time just keeping its umbrella right in front of itself, because the umbrella is actually a shield that the Rainwalkers use, and it's just very passive. It takes a huge beating, and that's really where you notice how basic the combat can be at times. Then you have the Relentless Walker, which is that enemy I dealt with in the protection section. That enemy takes a beating, use the stun talismans on it. And then you have the Rage Walker. The Rage Walker, you can finish it off with a simple Quick Purge, but it feels like it has almost the same amount of HP as the Relentless Walker, yet you can finish it off with one Quick Purge attack, which is odd. Oh, this right here, this is a Lamentation. So, Lamentations patrol the skies. but you can knock them over with one shot from a normal hit from the fire. And after you do that, you can either escape the enemy and get behind it to do a quick purge, which will kill it, or you can follow up with a stun talisman. I'd recommend using the stun talisman on her when you actually knock her out of the air with the fire, because she's heavily vulnerable during that animation, so it's very easy to get your stun talisman on her. Because if you try to wait for her to come to you, there are times where she can do this jump attack that has an incredible amount of range, and it's hard to predict. So that's why I recommend the moment you knock her over with the fire, run in there with a stun talisman and finish her off. She doesn't stand a chance. And it's so odd because it feels like the Lamentation has almost the same amount of HP as a Relentless Walker, yet the Lamentation takes one quick purge to take out. Yet the Relentless Walker is not the same. There are definitely some moments where I really feel like it should take one quick purge to finish off the enemy, but then there are other moments where it takes two, and it's a little odd. But that enemy right there, that's the Rugged Walker, the one on the left. That was a Rain Slasher on the right. Yeah, both enemies, pretty annoying, but the Rain Slasher is the most dangerous variant. And there is also another variant of the Rain Walker called the Shadow Hunter. It's the one that looks like a police officer. It functions just like the Rain Slasher, so nothing to really say about that enemy, but it has an incredible amount of life. The Rain Slasher, one hit to the head with the bow, you can kill her. But the Shadow Hunter, it takes two shots from the bow to the head to finish off a Shadow Hunter. I don't know why there is this difference here. It should really take only one shot from the bow and arrow in order to finish off all variants of the walkers. But it's different with that enemy. It's rather odd. But it has the same range attack that the Rain Slasher has. So it's a little disappointing that there are some similarities between those two variants. And I think that's all of the walker variants you need to know. Then you have the student enemies. So there are two student variations. You have the Students of Misery and the Students of Pain. The Students of Misery are the female variant. The ones in the white dresses, they die instantly from one single shot with fire, with the basic attack. The black ones, the charge attack will actually expose their core. It doesn't kill them, but you can at least finish them off by exposing their core. And then you have the Students of Pain. There's only one variant of the Students of Pain, but they're somehow resilient to fire. So you have to either knock them over with fire and use a quick purge on them when they're on the ground if you have the upgrade, or just use two fire attacks, or just use one fire attack and then finish it off with wind. Or you redirect their projectiles back. This is the case with every single student variant. They do have a range attack that if you perfectly block it and redirect it back at them, it will always knock them over. But again, what is the whole point of having that kind of knockdown animation if you can't follow it up with a quick purge? I don't know if enemies that are knocked over are more susceptible to damage, because there is an upgrade in the skill tree system where you deal increased damage to enemies that are knocked over. But I don't know if that implies that at baseline, enemies do take increased damage when they're on the ground, but I really don't notice that much of a difference. It just seems kind of silly and rather tedious and rather awkward to not have that ability to finish off enemies on the ground. It feels like a game where the stomp ability should be a basic ability, but no, it's not the case, and it just leads to this very awkward process of trying to capitalize on the knockdown by just rapidly shooting them, like in the older Resident Evil games. Or even in Resident Evil 7. Not really so much in Resident Evil 7, though, because the enemies die very fast from the shotgun shell, and you're going to be knocking over the enemies with the shotgun anyway, so it doesn't really matter in that regard. So that's an unfair comparison to make. But speaking of comparisons, I did mention several times in my blind playthrough a comparison between this game and Resident Evil Village. Because in all honesty, guys, I feel like the comparison might seem rather unfair to you guys, but I feel like there is a fair comparison to be made between Ghostwire Tokyo and Resident Evil Village, because Resident Evil Village is often regarded as being a Resident Evil game that favors a kind of open world design that could almost be on par with a wide linear experience. But given the fact that people have been making this judgment, I have to make this judgment as well, and Ghostwire Tokyo offers a better world compared to Resident Evil Village, and I've talked a lot about the underwhelming world design of Resident Evil Village. The village design has no kind of exploration to it, and it's very linear, and there's not a lot of unique things that you can do that warrant the use of explosives, for instance, like blowing up walls to reveal side areas, or revealing some kind of hidden item or something. Like, there's nothing like that with the village area. It's just such a disappointing area with little to actually see or do. And all you're using it for is just a hub area to just connect all of the Lords' areas together. But this game at least has a lot of exploration, and it's just so fun to actually explore each of the individual areas of Shibuya that have their own character to them, and also interacting with vendors, and also finding side missions, and draining spirits. It's fun. And also, the combat on Ghostwire Tokyo is about as basic as the combat in Resident Evil Village. But despite this, Ghostwire Tokyo's combat is way better than Resident Evil Village's combat. At least it doesn't introduce any throwaway mechanics. Like, the perfect block, at least it has the utility of avoiding damage entirely. And then in Resident Evil Village, the only similar mechanic to this is the counter you can do against the Lycans, where you hit them in the head, it puts them into that knockback animation, they lunge forward, and then you press the block button to shake them off and just kick them away. That's the only equivalent that I can cite, but it's shit! It's fucking awful! Because elevation is a factor to consider. If you are above a Lycan, or even when you're on flat ground, there are certain flat surfaces that don't give you the ability to hit the Lycan in the head with a gun, so I don't see why elevation is a factor to consider when using a projectile to trigger a stun in a Lycan that causes them to lunge forward. But if you're above the Lycan, and you're not standing at the correct elevation, you will never get the counter. And there are so many changes in elevation, given the fact that Resident Evil Village favors a mountainous landscape, that even the slightest difference in elevation makes all the difference in ensuring that this mechanic either shows itself or doesn't show itself. And it's a badly implemented mechanic. I have no idea how QA could miss something like that. But also with the characters, Ghostwire Tokyo and Resident Evil Village have the same problem where certain characters are underutilized. Like, Resident Evil Village is the biggest perpetrator of this crime because big characters like Chris Redfield and Mia are completely excluded from the game. There is no sort of development of those characters, and Chris Redfield acts completely out of character to be someone completely different that it doesn't feel like Chris Redfield. And Mia is such a crucial part of Ethan's character, and Resident Evil Village is marketed as Ethan's personal journey, yet you're going to be neglecting Mia for all of the game? Are you fucking serious? Like, at least with Ghostwire Tokyo, I don't feel like the fact that we didn't get a chance to see Ed or Dale is that significant compared to Chris or Mia, because at least in the context of this being like a new IP, they don't feel like that significant of characters. But given the fact that it's Chris Redfield and Mia, and they have been in previous games, that is where this significant problem really shows itself compared to Ghostwire Tokyo. And then with lore in Ghostwire Tokyo is handled miles better than Resident Evil Village's lore, because Resident Evil Village has little to no lore whatsoever, and it instead relies upon cheap shortcuts in storytelling, story points that are just pulled out of the blue, complete 180s in character designs. Like, Chris Redfield acts completely different, the BSA is magically evil in Resident Evil Village, and there's no kind of documents or of audio logs that we can actually get in the games that flesh out the story that we actually care about. We only get this in Castle Dimitrescu and in Heisenberg's factory, but it's only like one document in those areas. In Castle Dimitrescu, you have the document that talks about the daughters and their ability to dissociate into flies, but it's still not a well-explained document and makes no sense, and it completely exaggerates the mold's capabilities. And then in Heisenberg's factory, you have the audio log that you can get in that one side area that is so detailed, but you don't hear any other audio logs in the game. Fucking stupid! But in Ghostwire Tokyo, when you pick up relics, when you pick up KK's investigation notes, when you do side missions, you get additional insight into the characters of Akito, KK, and his gang, and also with their personalities and the like, and also with Japan's mythology and beliefs. It's so cool! For a short experience, they actually provide more lore than Resident Evil Village, and it makes no sense. But this video is too short right now to really get these thoughts across right now. And right now we're doing a boss fight against Koamote, which is a stealth boss fight, and it's very simple. But Koamote, I don't know what her combat is like. I don't know what happens if she actually attacks you, but she's very slow to attack, which is good, because, of course, you don't have the capabilities provided by KK, given that you're separated from him. But all you need to do is get behind Koamote and finish her off. Her AI doesn't change anytime you destroy these cores. You can also use the explosive barrels in the area in order to stun her, and during the animation of being stunned, you can perform a quick purge on her. And it's so ironic how they give you this ability to put an enemy into a stun animation and then punish it with a quick purge, yet this mentality doesn't apply with other enemies. If this mechanic exists for Kowamote, why can't this mechanic exist when we're perfectly blocking enemies? We perfectly block an enemy, and then we get behind them to do a quick purge, or we hit them in the leg so many times, they're in a lengthy stun animation, and we should be able to punish them with a quick purge. I mean, it'd be balanced out by the fact that they have other enemies supporting them, and you have limited ether, and the like. I mean, there is no justification you can give as to why that shouldn't be a mechanic, and it makes no sense. But I'll talk more about these points in the later videos. This is the end of Chapter 3. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.